If this is your number one concern, I would think twice about becoming a Christian. Hi, my name's Amanda Smith. I'm a songwriter and a deep thinker, and I am passionate about helping people to navigate their faith after disappointment, loss, tragedy, and deconstruction, because that's where I used to be myself. So, let me pull up my notes here. Today, we are going to be talking about the prayer for safety and what do we do when it does not get answered. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Some of the questions that we're going to be answering are, if I serve God, will he bless me? Or does he actually promise me something completely different? Like danger. If God doesn't answer my prayers, is it because I lack faith? Right? There's a big teaching out there that says that this is why God does not answer your prayers. And I can tell you right now, that's not it. So we'll talk about why. What are the 3 reasons that people should not expect safety when they become children of God? How is a certain teaching that dominates the West very similar to Baal worship? We'll talk about that. That one's from my brother, who is an Old Testament scholar. And should you have faith and just keep praying and praying and praying for something for years? Or is there a time to stop and to start praying for something else? And what is that something else? You're like, so prayer for safety. All right. Everyone in the world prays for safety, right? Christians pray for safety. Non-believers pray for safety. In fact, if there's any time that a non-believer is going to kind of believe for a minute, it's when they pray for safety. Like, if you rescue me, God, I'll do anything. I'll serve you forever, right? Everybody prays for safety. In fact, I think there's a song by Jelly Roll about that. Pretty sure. And it's like, why should God listen to me? Because I only come to him when I need help, you know? Because, I mean, he's right. Everyone prays for safety. And if you're not a believer, you still pray for it. So I used to pray for safety. I used to prioritize it. And I'll be honest, I sometimes still do. Okay. But it's in a completely different context. So I will be talking about that. But there used to be a time that I prioritized safety and rescue from God. I asked him to make the waters smooth and to calm the storm, right? And I don't pray those things anymore because the last time I prayed earnestly and fervently for safety was for my twin boys who died, and God did not give us safety. And I was not the only one that prayed for them. Like hundreds of people who had great faith were all praying for us, and God still said no. So then you have the question, if God's just going to do what he's going to do, why pray at all, right? Like, what's the point? And so, to be honest, I did not know how to pray, so I just did not. I did not pray for about 2 years. And I was deconstructing and reconstructing my faith during that time. At the end of the 2 years, I finally revisited it. And I was like, I need to get this praying thing down because it's such a big part of being a Christian. I need to figure this out. And so I was pondering it, and that's how I wrote the song Gethsemane Prayer, which is probably completely messed up because I actually recorded this just like 10 minutes ago, and I forgot to push record on my audio interface. Like, I'm already kind of paranoid and make sure. Okay, yeah, it's going. We're good. I just want the audio to be good. Okay. So one of the things that I pondered was, did I just not have enough faith? You know, I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. And what blew this out of the water was Jesus himself in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? He prays before he gets crucified that God, who can do anything, he prays that he would take this cup from him. And then he says, not my will, but yours be done. But he does pray for safety and anything else. And he's so stressed out by what's looming ahead of him that he does something very rare, but it's actually a thing. And he sweats drops of blood. Now, I've been stressed. I have never been that stressed. That's a lot of stress. And even though he was the Son of God, so obviously he has faith, and God was obviously pleased with him. I mean, he spoke out of heaven and said, this is my son whom I am well pleased with, right? When Jesus was baptized. In spite of all those things, God denied his request and said no. And Jesus had to go to the cross for us, right? And sometimes that happens. We have to take a hit for the team, us as followers of Jesus. And so I was contemplating this. And so the first verse was through this contemplation. And I will post a link to this lyric video down in the description box, but I'm just going to read the lyrics. So the first verse says, Jesus laying on the ground of Gethsemane, angels gathered all around as he prayed this plea. Not my will, but thine be done. Though I suffer loss, help me run my race to win. Help me bear my cross. And then he says, give me grace to drink this cup that you've given me. No, I said this. And give me strength to bear my cross up to Calvary. Obviously, I am not a poem reader. I am a poem singer, but yeah. The point is, Jesus himself was denied the prayer for safety. And if we follow in his footsteps, we can expect exactly the same thing. So following Jesus means that we will face our own crucifixions. And maybe you already have, and you're struggling. You're like, I didn't know God would allow me to go through this. Jesus tells his followers, including us, deny yourselves, take up your crosses, and follow me. And this is not a very popular teaching. I doubt this video is going to go viral because this is not a fun teaching. Especially considering that the health and wealth gospel dominates our culture, our Christian culture. And it's in a lot of even churches that reject the health and wealth gospel. There's still these like a little yeast that leavens the whole dough. And you just need to know what they look like, right? So some of the health and wealth responses to suffering, because in the health and wealth gospel, you don't suffer, right? If you serve God, he will bless you and he will not allow you to, suffer. They'll say things like, God wants me to be happy. So I think he's going to answer my prayers for this thing. Or the word of faith movement, where you just like speak a word of faith over someone to like make the situation better. It's kind of like a Band-Aid over like the situation. Which, by the way, is a lot like Michael Scott, like coming out of his office and being like, I declare bankruptcy, right? And the office just kind of sits there stunned. And then he goes back into like his little, cubicle. And then Oscar comes in. He was like, you realize that just because you said the word bankruptcy doesn't mean that your financial problems go away. And Michael's like, I didn't say it. I declared it, right? That's what it reminds me, like the word of faith thing kind of reminds me of that. It's so unrealistic. Like, it's just like when real life comes up against a teaching like that, it falls apart. And then you like start deconstructing because you're like, oh my goodness, they taught me this in church. What else did I learn in church that's that doesn't make any sense in real life? And so, yeah, the health and wealth gospel definitely set me up to deconstruct, but it sets a lot of people up. And you can kind of see one of the disciples kind of believing these things that, God will save us from suffering in the Bible. So I'm going to actually read that section because it's actually kind of funny. So Peter prayed these things over Jesus when Jesus told him that he's going to the cross. So let's read it. It's in Matthew chapter 16, 14 through 25, right? And it's the context of deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. So the Bible says, from then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law. He would be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. So he's telling his disciples this. Peter. So Peter takes him aside and he begins to reprimand him for saying such things. And he says, heaven forbid, Lord, he said, this will never happen to you. Like, I could totally imagine Peter being like in our current, church today and being like, I'm just going to pray like a word of faith over that situation and God's going to listen, or like, you serve God, so of course he's going to bless you. He's not going to allow you to die and be crucified in this terrible way. Jesus's response to Peter cracks me up because I am not as mean as Jesus. Like, I'm pretty, like, I'm not a people pleaser, but Jesus is really not a people pleaser. So he says to Peter, "Get away from me, Satan." I've never called anyone Satan before, ever. I don't usually call people names. I never call people names, but he says, "Get away from me, Satan," which to me indicates that, like, I would call the health and wealth gospel of you will never suffer if you follow Jesus, like humanistic and in error, but Jesus is calling it like satanic. And here's why. He continues, he says, "You are a dangerous trap to me." And this is true because the health and wealth gospel does become a dangerous trap. People who go through really hard lives and the health and wealth gospel did not come true for them. If you're like me, you're going to deconstruct, like you're going to throw out everything. And thankfully for me, I didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I reconstructed, but many people do not reconstruct. They just throw the whole thing out. And honestly, the health and wealth gospel needs to be deconstructed, so that's a good thing, but not coming back is where, you know, I'm trying to help you to come back. So, but it is a dangerous trap. So he says, "Get away from me, Satan. You're a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." This is what the health and wealth gospel is. It's very humanistic. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If any of you wants to follow me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For anyone who wants to save their life in this world will lose it for the next. But if you give up your life for my name's sake, you will save it." So there's a choice here, right? You can't have a good life here and a good life in heaven. You need to be sacrificing one or the other. Like, it's a choice that we have to make. And we get so surprised at this. And Peter tells us, like, don't be surprised. It's funny, Peter tells us. So obviously Peter learned his lesson because in 1 Peter 4:12, Peter says, "Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you are going through as if something strange were happening to you." Like, so he learned, right, that it's gonna get rough. My brother Steven was talking about Baal worship last summer. And so my brother is he's earning his doctorate in Old Testament studies. And so he's a scholar and he speaks like the Hebrew and the Greek. And so if I have questions, I usually go ask him. And my dad's a pastor too, so I'll ask him stuff too. But Stephen was talking about Baal worship from the Old Testament. And it struck me how similar it is to the health and wealth gospel today. So Baal worship is, in the Old Testament, was attractive because Baal offered his followers children, number one, children and fertility, health and wealth and safety if they followed him. And so the Israelites in the Old Testament found this very attractive, not because they loved Baal, but because they loved themselves and they wanted to have a good life. And so they would follow him, right? God's not like that. In the New Testament, God puts obstacles in the ways of his followers. And he puts us on a narrow way. And he makes the gate really, really narrow. And he promises us things. But it's not those, health and wealth. He promises us things like, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world, right? John 16:33. Or he'll say things like, anyone who wants to live a godly life will suffer persecution, right? Which is true. 70% of Christians are persecuted today. So God does promise us stuff. But it's not necessarily like the mantras that we're taught from the Old Testament in church. Like in the New Covenant, things are difficult. And so, of course, he also promises us, I will never leave you or forsake you, things like that. So we're getting to that in a moment, but he does not promise us safety. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. He does not promise us safety like Baal does. And this is because I think God is trying to figure out, like, do we follow him for him? Or do we follow him for us? Which one, are we, like, do we love our lives here? Or are we willing to sacrifice them because we love God? And we're Christians because we love God. See, that's the difference. So, the Bible's full of warning us that suffering is imminent and it's going to be coming. Romans 8:17 says, we must share in Jesus' sufferings to be glorified with him. Philippians 1:29 says, for you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Jesus, I love this, but also the privilege of suffering for him. Actually, I have kind of a Bible study on this, and I'm offering it for free to my email subscribers. So if you are interested in that, I will put a link to that in the description box below as well, so you can access that. In essence, Christians should not be prioritizing safety. It's just not going to happen. And there's 3 reasons why. There's 3 people, I guess, that are against us. Number 1 is pretty obvious. It's going to be, the devil, right? That makes sense. So all of us by default are what the Bible would call children of wrath or enemies of God. Or in some extreme cases, Jesus even calls us sons of the devil, right? So from the fall in the beginning, we basically allied forces with the serpent to tell our creator, I don't want to do what you want me to do, even though I'm your creation. I'm done. So we rebelled against God, right? And which is what Satan was also doing. So we kind of joined him in our enmity with God. And yet while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, right? Because that was the price that it took for God to buy us back. And so when we get bought back, when we make that decision to tell our creator, yes, you call the shots for me. I want to be your creation and glorify you now and not, who I used to be with, the devil. That does not make Satan happy. You're leaving his family, you're leaving his alliance, and you're joining the enemy. And so, of course, he's going to attack you. And of course, he's going to try to nullify your ministry. He's like this, parent that is going to, give you stuff to keep you happy just to keep you there. And so I've heard a lot of Christians say that when they leave their secular lives is when life started becoming kind of hard. By the way, I apologize if you can hear my dog snoring in the background. She's a Boston Terrier. And even when she's not sleeping, she's pretty loud. So I am sorry about that. So Satan attacks us in various ways. And you can see those different ways in the book of Job in the first chapter, right? He'll use natural disasters, supernatural disasters like fire coming out of heaven. He'll use evil people, right? We'll talk about that in a second. And he will use illnesses, right? These are all ways that Satan tries to attack us, especially if we're on the offense, right? And he's retaliating. One of the ways that he uses, I guess that he attacks us and that he compromises our safety, though, is definitely persecution from people who still love sin. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians 2:15-17 that the gospel is an aroma of life to those who are being saved. We love it. And it's a stench of death to those who are perishing. I don't know if you've ever been walking along the road. I live out in the country, so sometimes I'll walk and there'll be a dead animal in the ditch because a car hit it and it stinks so bad. That's how you are to non-Christians. You stink. They do not want to hear your message. And so 70% of Christians are persecuted for their faith. In fact, there's some atrocious numbers, like in Russia. During the Soviet Union, 20 million Christians died for their faith. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Right now, you hear about in the news, Syria, right? Or the Congo's really bad, Nigeria. These are all places where people face terrible crucifixions in excruciating ways, not just symbolic, I'm going to deny my life today. I'm going to wake up and tell the Lord. No, it's real torture and death because they're Christians. Safety should not be your number one concern. Which leads me to the third person who will make our lives a little bit less safe. And this one might be surprising. It is God himself. So, as I said, Satan's a really good, he spoils us to keep us happy and kind of numbed in his family. God's not like that. God loves us and he disciplines us, and he will allow Satan's attacks to hit us so that we become better people, right? We learn obedience through the things that we suffer. So the discipline might not be because you're sinning. It could just be that you have a terrible mindset and you believe things that are not true, and God has to deconstruct those things for you and rebuild what is true, right? That's what happened with me. And so he will allow hard things to happen. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So if we're going to follow in Jesus's footsteps, we should expect lack of safety. So verse 2 was me contemplating this. I said, Jesus never promised us a life that's free from pain. If we walk in his footsteps, we must lose to gain. So not my will, but thine be done. Though I suffer loss, help me run my race to win and help me bear my cross. I don't pray for safety or the sailing to be smooth, but I pray that you provide the strength to make it through. So I would say that the person who I think illustrates prayer for safety, for strength over safety, is Paul. So Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, 7-10, he says, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God, to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. So the Greek word for the thorn here is not just a little splinter in your finger. It's like it's like a stake. It is excruciating pain. And he's suffering, right? And so he says 3 different times, I beg the Lord to take it away. So notice that Paul doesn't pray for safety like a million times and just never stops. I won't stop. I'll always have faith, Some people, it's interesting, they never leave the Garden of Gethsemane because they're never willing to say, not my will, but thine be done, right? They just hold on to this dream that they have, this wounded dream, and they will not take no for an answer, even though God, that's all he's going to give them is no. And so they just pray over and over and over and over and over for years. And notice how many times Paul prays for safety. It's just the 3 times. And then he prays for strength. He says, each time he prayed, God said, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weaknesses. So he said, so now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses, in insults and hardships, persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong, right? Instead of prioritizing safety from tragedy, we need to start prioritizing strength in tragedy. That's what we need to start doing, because God will lead us through some difficult situations. Now, he does promise to be with us in the valley of the shadow of death, right? And his rod and staff will comfort us, but he's not going to, make us avoid the valley of the shadow of death. We might have to go through it. And it's going to be a Garden of Gethsemane. Hopefully, we understand, though, that it should be worth it in the next life. That's where faith comes in, right? So verse 3 that I wrote says, this is where the encouragement comes. In my songs, I try to always have that final summit and not a bunch of false summits of, expect a miracle because it's going to happen type of stuff. Because I don't know about that. That might be true, might not be true. But I do know that the final summit and the prize that we're, running with endurance for should be heaven, right? It should be the next life. In fact, Paul says, if this life is all that Christians if it's all we have to look forward to, then we should be pitied more than everybody else in the entire world. Like he says this. So the 3rd verse is, for when I reach that distant shore and enter paradise, my redemption far outweighs what I've sacrificed. Not my will, but thine be done, though I suffer loss. Help me run my race to win. Help me bear my cross. For when I pass that finish line and walk through heaven's gates, what I suffered won't compare to glory that awaits. And this is based off of a verse that says the same thing, right? What we suffer, it won't even matter. In the end, we're the kids in the marshmallow test. We're the kids that you put the marshmallow in front of the kiddo and You say something like, if you wait for 5 minutes, even though nowadays with kids, it's probably like 2. Sorry. I worked in the public school system, so I would be like 2. If you wait for 5 minutes, then I'll give you 2 marshmallows. And then the parent or whoever will leave. And then they'll like do a little filming thing from behind the corner and they'll see what the kid does, right? And a lot of times the kids will just like pop the marshmallow in their mouth and move on. Some of them wait though. And so the question for us is not you can have one now and you can have one later. It's we must identify with Christ and his sufferings to identify with his glory. We must lose our lives and our expectations. Not our lives, like we don't have to die for our faith, but I mean, some people do, but we must lose our expectations of safety and our prioritization of this life being good if we want the next life to be good, right? We do care about safety, but it's not this life safety. It's the next life safety. It's eternity safety, right? Jesus says in that, actually, if you kept going on with what he was saying to Peter about deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me, he says, what would it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? We are those kids with the marshmallows where we sit, we have our lives, and God says you can have now. Or if you wait till the end of your life and you die, wait till eternity, you can have 1,000,000 billion marshmallows. So it's up to you. And so I am waiting for the 1,000,000 billion marshmallows. I don't know about you. Maybe you are in your own Garden of Gethsemane and something like, I don't know your situation, but maybe you just know it's coming. And maybe it's cancer, or it's like your spouse is threatening to leave you, or in my case, like it was, your babies are going to die. Or maybe you have a child that was diagnosed with autism. It's just life-changing diagnosis. I don't know where you're at, but I wrote this song for you, Gethsemane Prayer. I wrote this for you because I've been there too. And it's excruciating to face your cross and to know that you will have to drink this cup and it's going to be hard to swallow. It's going to be hard. And the prayer for safety is over. And you have to start praying for that strength, right? So I pray for you, and I want you to know that this song is a prayer that you can pray if you are in your own Garden of Gethsemane. So I will put a link to that below, and just make sure if you like my content, subscribe to my channel and like the video and share it. That helps me out a lot. So thank you so much for joining me and for listening to the story behind Gethsemane Prayer. And I will see everybody later. All right.